dietitian, Elizabeth. So without further ado, Elizabeth, I'll let you go ahead and take it away.
Perfect. Okay, let me get into presentation mode here. Any questions throughout the presentation? I'm seeing my presentation itself, so please go ahead and pop them in the chat, and then we'll get those answered as we go. So today we're talking all about heart health. We're not going to skip a beat. We're going to learn about it and learn how we can apply it to our lives. A little bit about Harmons Dietitian Services, a little bit about me. I've been working as a Harmons dietitian for the past 6 months, and for about 5 years previous to this role, I was in more of a clinical setting, so dealing with chronic disease and labs and all of that kind of stuff. So I love doing a presentation like this, in the fact where I can kind of marry my past experience with my current job, talking about food, and then also kind of why it matters, or how our food choices affect our health on the day-to-day basis. So a little bit about me. You might hear I have an accent. I'm originally from the Midwest, so I cheer on the Packers for my sports team of choice. But yeah, really happy to be here today and present. A little bit more about Harmons Dietitian Services. Did anyone know that Harmons had dietitians on staff? Well, if you didn't, we do. The Harmons Dietitians offer a variety of services, one being store tours and counseling. We counsel on a variety of different health and nutrition topics. And our store tours, we actually have a planned store tour every single month at every single location. So if you are a Harmons shopper, or maybe if you're not, usually we'll have handouts in the first or second lanes of our grocery checkout aisles, that you can pick up and see when the tour is. This month, it was all about heart health. So if there's a couple coming up and you're interested in the heart health topic, go ahead and check out our stores or even on our website. It will list our as well. That's a completely free offering. Our store tours will walk you through the aisles, answer questions, talk about that specific topic. And then alternatively, if you have a new diagnosis, like last week, someone got diagnosed with celiac disease and they needed to learn to eat gluten-free. So we set up a store tour, walked the aisles, pointed out different gluten-free options, and practiced some label reading. So always a completely free service for customers. So if you're interested, email me or check out our website. Another thing we do at Harmons is our tagging program. We have a dietitian's choice tag. It looks like a little green sticker on the side of the price tag of foods on the shelf. What we do is there's 6 dietitians on staff at Harmons, and each half a year or every 6 months, we will go through every single item in our store, review the nutrition, and find those options that are healthier choices or better for you options. And we will select it and put that little green sticker next to it. So if you're not a big fan of label reading or don't know where to start, looking for those green stickers can be a great way to make healthy choices. We also offer cooking classes. So quite a few of our Harmons locations have cooking schools within the store. So each month there will be a dietitian cooking class where you can directly apply those concepts and cook a delicious meal. A lot of people do it for a date night or fun with friends. So that's a really cool thing we do as well. And then last, we write blogs, recipes, do social media, little bits about different topics and things like that. So we do a lot. And if you didn't know about any of it, feel free to ask me more or hop into our stores to check it out yourself. Okay, so let's talk heart disease. Heart disease is the #1 cause of death in the US and in Utah for both men and women. Many people who die suddenly from heart disease actually have no symptoms before, or maybe didn't know that they had heart disease. So this is kind of a topic that, although we might not be knowing that we have heart disease, it's a good thing to kind of learn a little bit more so we can be well prepared and make those healthy changes in our day to day. Okay, true or false? I would know if I had high blood pressure. I can't see the chat, so if someone wants to come off mute or tell me what you're seeing in the chat, true or false, what do you think? I would know if I had high blood pressure.
We're getting a lot of thumbs down and false.
Hey, right on. It is false. There are often few or no symptoms of having high blood pressure. So if you didn't test or didn't go to the doctor recently or get one of those manual or automatic blood pressure tests, you might not even know if you had high blood pressure. So, how do we know? How do we know if we are at risk for heart disease or not? There are a couple different risk factors, and some of them are modifiable, meaning that we can change these things. Others are non modifiable or things we cannot change. Those things include age, family history, sex at birth, or menopausal status. Can't really change those things. But good thing is, the list of things that we can change is almost double. So smoking can lead to these. If you do have high blood pressure, if you have high cholesterol, a history or currently dealing with diabetes, obesity, physical inactivity, which can be defined as 150 minutes or less per week, if you consume excessive alcohol, or if you have irregular sleep habits, you're not getting your 7 to 8 hours of sleep at night, that could be a risk factor for heart disease. So let's go back to blood pressure. You guys were totally on track when you said it was false that you would know if you have high blood pressure. But did you know that 47% of the adults in the US have hypertension, or just another way to say high blood pressure? And that high blood pressure is a risk factor for heart attack, heart failure, stroke, kidney failure, and eye damage. So, why it's a risk factor is because if you think of blood pressure, if there's more pressure in your bloodstream, what can happen is there can start to be small tears and cracks in your arteries, which can then catch plaque or have plaque form, which can lead to the heart attack or heart failure or stroke, especially if that plaque breaks off and makes its way through the bloodstream. So having high blood pressure, that's why it's a risk factor. Knowing your numbers is going to be important, right? What does high blood pressure or hypertension even look like when it comes to looking at my lab values? So normal is going to be less than 120 over less than 80. So when we look at blood pressure, there's two numbers: systolic, which is the one we want less than 120, and the diastolic, less than 80. When we're thinking about an elevated blood pressure, that's when we might see that systolic or that first number 120 to 129, and still our diastolic less than 80. That would still be considered an elevated blood pressure. If we think about stage 1, stage 2, or hypertensive, that systolic numbers can continue to increase. So we're going to have a higher pressure in our blood, stage 1 being 130 to 139, stage 2 being 140 or higher, and then hypertensive would be 180 or higher. And then same with diastolic. Diastolic for stage 1 would be 80 to 89, stage 2 would be higher than 90, and hypertensive would be 120 or higher. So this is a number that typically you'll have checked every single time you go to the doctor. They'll set you down, set the blood pressure cuff, inflate it, and then check those pressures. Sometimes they're using a stethoscope, and sometimes they actually use one that's automatic. So this would be a good thing to keep an eye on. Sometimes people will have one at home that they can measure and it's automated. I would say those aren't quite as accurate, but if you're watching your high blood pressure, I think that it's a great way to keep an eye on what your trends are looking like, or kind of what your blood pressure is on a day-to-day basis. Because when you get it done at the doctor's office, it's just one time at one moment in time. The next lab value that we like to look at when it pertains to heart disease is our cholesterol. And cholesterol in and of itself has a couple different categories. The first category, LDL cholesterol. This is oftentimes what people think of it as that bad cholesterol, or the one that if it's higher chance of heart disease. And again, this is the one that is the major risk factor for heart disease. HDL cholesterol, often termed the good cholesterol. If we have a high HDL, that's actually protective against heart disease. So if you had low HDL or it wasn't as high, that could be a risk for heart disease. We're not getting that protective effect from having a higher amount of that good cholesterol. And then total cholesterol, this is going to be when it's the HDL and LDL are combined together. And triglycerides is another one that is monitored. Oftentimes, when you're getting all of these labs drawn, this is what's going to be referred to as the lipid panel. And high triglycerides are also going to be a cause for concern, especially when it comes to heart disease. So again, I love this little drawing here. We can see both cholesterols at work, that HDL, that good cholesterol, helping to remove other forms of cholesterol from the bloodstream. We see that guy, he's working hard. He has his pill full of that cholesterol or that plaque kind of building up in the arteries there and removing it out. But that LDL is kind of undoing the work of the good cholesterol and putting more into the bloodstream. So just kind of a good visual representation about how one is good, one is maybe not so good. Other screening numbers, and if you're watching this on your computer, I think this is a great option if you can take a screenshot or when these are shared out after the presentation or recorded, pause here and just take a picture or I'm not going to go through every single number here, but this is good information to know. I think a lot of the times when we go to the doctor's office, they'll give us this long list of lab work, but what's good, what's bad, it will sometimes show us online, but sometimes it doesn't. So knowing where it's optimal to be is going to be a great thing. So take a moment, take a screenshot, or remember to come back to this for the screening numbers. And this will all of those kind of normal or desirable or high levels for total cholesterol, HDL, that good cholesterol, LDL, the bad cholesterol, and the triglycerides. I'm not going to read through them all, but I think it's a great reference. Okay, so it was a red slide. We talked about modifiable and non-modifiable risk factors. So some of those risk factors are contributed to our lifestyle. So specifically weight management, we saw on that list of modifiable risk factors, if you have obesity or overweight. So a healthy weight is associated with a lower risk of heart disease. And it actually shows that losing 5 to 7% of your body weight can help reduce your risk for heart disease if you are overweight or obese. Physical activity. Physical inactivity increases your risk for heart disease. And this one makes a lot of sense to me because you think about it, when I go for a run or if I go outside and start walking my dog, maybe I'm going up a hill, I can feel my pumping the blood through. I'm exercising my heart when I'm exercising my other muscle groups as well. After all, our heart is a muscle within our body. So if you aren't exercising your heart regularly, it could lead to heart disease. So again, when we think about physical inactivity, I like to define that as under 150 minutes of physical activity, moderate physical activity per week. And that could be split up multiple different ways. If we think about 150 minutes, that's 5 days of 30 minutes of activity. When I differentiate between and vigorous moderate, I like to say I'm working hard, maybe but I can still carry on a conversation with somebody else. If it's vigorous, I'm normal conversation with somebody, I might be a little bit out of breath or, kind of pausing in between my words and things like that. Another risk factor is diabetes and prediabetes. So diabetes actually leads to the damage of blood vessels, and this can increase your heart disease risk. So if you have diabetes or prediabetes and it's maybe not managed the best, that could also be increasing your risk factors for heart disease. So again, why it's here on this slide is because there are ways that we can adjust our lifestyle or change what we're eating to help better manage diabetes and prediabetes. Lastly, sleep and stress. And I think this one's really hard because it's really hard to get 7 or 8 every single night. And sometimes our stress levels are other things in our life, such as our job or our family, or I don't know, financial things that are going on in our life. So, finding those healthy ways to manage stress can really help with our risk. Same thing with getting at least 7 to 8 hours of sleep per night. This can also reduce our risk for heart disease. Now, let's talk diet. Diet is definitely something within our lifestyle that we can control. When it comes to blood pressure, there are specific recommendations for the things that we eat. In terms of sodium, less is going to be better for heart health. The recommendation for heart health would be 1,500 milligrams or 3/4 of a teaspoon or less per day. Whoa, that's not a lot, right? So this is one area, a couple slides, that nutrition facts panel and really reading that to find out how much sodium is in our food and maybe some of those places that we don't even realize that we are getting sodium where we didn't even think we were. In terms of potassium per day, how do we get that? Sources of potassium include nuts, potatoes, beans, and legumes. So things like our lentils and spinach are great sources of potassium. Of calcium, we aim for 1,100 milligrams per day. We can get that from dairy, dark green veggies, fish, or tofu. All great sources of calcium. In terms of magnesium, we aim for 500 milligrams per day. And great sources of magnesium are nuts. And my specific favorite, it's not a nut, it's a seed, but pumpkin seeds are a great source of magnesium. And having a little handful or adding it into a trail mix could be a great way to meet your magnesium needs throughout the day. Beans and legumes are also a great source. Our grains, specifically whole grains, and our leafy green vegetables are all great sources of magnesium. When we talk about high blood pressure or hypertension, there is often a diet that we hear of called the DASH diet. It actually stands for Dietary Approaches to Stop Hypertension. And all of those things on that previous slide, I'll go back, the sodium, the potassium, the calcium, magnesium, are taken into account with this DASH diet. So people who follow this diet, specifically those who have high blood pressure, there's an emphasis on fruit, beans, and low-fat dairy. There's also an emphasis on foods that are high in fiber. In regards to fiber, do people know?
We've got somebody put in the chat that said grains, vegetables,
Yes,
legumes. Looks like some comments are
great.
filing through, but those are the top three.
Nice. I love it. I love the grains too. Specifically, whole grains are a great source of fiber. Legumes, veggies, fruits, all excellent sources of fiber. And fiber too, I think this is a place that might get a little confusing for some people, is fiber is actually a type of carbohydrate, but our body doesn't really digest it as well or digest it barely at all. And so that's why if you hear of people saying, a diet high in fiber can help you go to the bathroom or regulate your bowel habits, it's most definitely true, because what happens is fiber, there's many different types of fiber, but it does a great job because it's not digested, it works our way through our digestive system and helps us be regular with our bowel movements. But it can also help with things like heart disease in the fact that increased fiber in our diet can actually help to reduce our cholesterol levels. And we'll get into that in just a little bit. The DASH diet also focuses on reductions in saturated fat, total fat, and then total sodium. Looking at foods that specifically reduce risk, one is fish. So the recommendation would be try to eat fish at least 2 times a week. And more than 2 times a week is even better. Choosing those fattier fish like salmon, trout, sardines, cod, mackerel, and shellfish are excellent choices. The reason being that type of fat that's in those fish contains omega-3 fatty acids, and that omega-3 is excellent for brain health, and that fat keeps us full for a longer period of time. So it's a great thing to include in our day to day. I think this is a hard one for a lot of people because a lot of times I have people come in and they tell me, oh, I don't really like fish a lot. So, my biggest tip for trying to eat more fish during the week is finding ways that you really love to eat it in a quick way. So, one would be like a tuna fish mixed up on some whole wheat crackers with some veggies or things like that. That would be a great way to eat it during the week. Or when you are cooking it at home, specifically, let's say you're cooking a fillet of salmon, using a meat thermometer to really temp it, the temperature that fish needs to get to in the inside is 145 degrees. I often find people aren't really sure how to cook fish, so they end up overcooking the fish. And that way it gets really dry and fishy tasting. When you take it out or stop cooking it right at 145 degrees as your temperature reads, it can be a lot more tender and more flavorful. So if you're one of those people who thinks, oh, I really don't like to eat fish a whole lot, that would be a great way to kind of try out some different ways to cook. Use that meat thermometer when you're cooking the fish to make sure it's a really nice tender piece, and you might enjoy it a little bit more. The other thing that I like to say about including fish in the diet is, you know, mix it up. Fresh fish is really delicious, but can be a little bit more expensive. Frozen fish, you have to cost fish throughout the week, or canned, like I said with the tuna, that cuts down the cost and the time to prepare. So it's all beneficial to heart health, but kind of mixing it up could be a great way to include it in your day to day. Another food that reduces risk is nuts. So, trying to eat nuts at least 5 times per week. So, only 1 ounce 5 times per week can reduce heart disease risk by up to 20%. Isn't that crazy? 20%. And so 1 ounce is kind of like a inside of your palm full of nuts. The one thing I would caution though is don't forget to limit the sodium. A lot of the times when we're choosing nuts from the snack aisle, they can be higher in salt or sodium. So choosing an unsalted variety or a low salt option. I do like salt on the nuts. So maybe I'm just going to choose one that has a little bit lower than the one I typically go for. And then also keep it convenient. Nuts can be stored for a long time without going bad. So keep them on hand or mix them up in mix, or maybe if you got the unsalted, throwing in a little bit of dried fruit or something like that could give it a different flavor without the sodium. This, I think, was the first thing that somebody said when we were talking about the fiber, but other foods to reduce risk are whole grains. I always like to do this with my hands and talk about whole grains in a little bit of background. So when we talk about whole grains versus refined grains, what that necessarily means is, let's pretend this is a piece of wheat. Our palms are together. We peel off the outside layer. It's called the husk. And inside, we will find the endosperm. It's that white part of the wheat. And we'll also find a little seed in there called the germ. That germ contains fat-soluble vitamins and healthy fats and a little bit of protein as well. That husk that we peeled off is a great source of dietary fiber. But the difference between refined grains and whole grains is that when we're choosing a product that is 100% whole grain, that uses all three parts, the husk, the endosperm, and the germ, or it uses the whole grain. Whereas the refined grain, or like your white bread or refined cereals, things like that, it may only include that endosperm. So they've taken the germ and the husk out. So with that, you're getting a little bit lower dietary fiber, protein, and some of those fat-soluble vitamins. So that's why I recommend whole grains. Try to eat them every day. 3 servings per day of whole grains can reduce your risk by up to 20% as well. Thing to include day to day. I like to think of breakfast time. If we are eating a waffle with our breakfast, maybe we're changing it to a 100% whole grain waffle. Those benefits we just talked about. Also, choose a variety. Trying to cook different types of whole grains can be fun, or, give us some different tastes or varieties throughout the meals that we typically cook. So things like barley, brown rice, farro, whole grain oats, or, quinoa, couscous, things like that on the shelf I don't always go for, but those are also whole grains and can be a great way to add variety. But keep it convenient. Cooked whole grains, I like to tell people I'm a lazy dietitian where I love to eat brown rice, but after a long work day, sometimes brown rice takes a really long time to cook. So finding those options on the grocery shelf that maybe they're already cooked brown rice that I can heat up in the microwave for 90 seconds, and I have a great whole grain side dish with a piece of protein, maybe a chicken breast, and some cut up zucchini. So kind of keep it convenient. I think eating healthy is hard because we think we have to go about it the hard way, but finding little swaps or things that we can do to cut down the time that it takes to make this healthy decision. Fruits and vegetables. Try to eat fruits and vegetables every single day. 5 servings per day of fruits and vegetables can reduce our risk by up to 17%. Choosing a variety and eating them whole. So eating different fruits and vegetables, one, it keeps it exciting. But two, there's been more and more research out there about something called phytochemicals, or the color of the skin of the fruits and vegetables. We know that they have fiber and vitamins and minerals, but the color of the fruits and vegetables also gives them unique properties and different benefits based off of that color to our body. So rather than with tomatoes and to kind of get some of the other benefits. Leave edible skins more fiber. If you think about celery, that fiber component is that shit and there's something hanging from your mouth, or the skin of that apple. So we're getting that fiber when we leave those skins on. And then also convenient. Canned, frozen, fresh, they are all beneficial. So find something with low sodium, or if you're looking for a canned fruit, make sure it's packed in 100% fruit juice or water instead of syrup. If it's in the syrup, it might be adding extra sugar that maybe we don't necessarily need because the fruit is nice and sweet on its own. Okay, I like to ask this question. Mix it up with the vegetables. Which one would you rather eat? Picture 1, the squash with some filling. Picture 2, the green beans. Picture 3, it looks like a grilled veggie assortment. Or picture 4, some potatoes that have been boiled and cubed up. What do you think?
We are all over the board here. 3, 4, 2, 4, 3s, mostly 3s and maybe 4s. I was going for number 1. It looks like I've only got one other person hanging in there with me.
And my answer is there's no real correct answer. I think the variety here is great. There's not one that's better than the other of different colors, but if maybe I'm choosing my canned green beans because I really like it, it goes with my meal, I've chosen a low sodium option, we know it's just as nutritious and giving us that benefit throughout our day as well. And maybe I'm choosing, the potatoes on one day, and then the next day I'm going to be choosing that acorn squash. So I think the most important piece here is including vegetables in our diet and switching it up from time to time so we're not bored with it. Because what I find is once we get bored with some of our food choices, we're not going to keep choosing more veggies from our diets. Okay, a couple other tips for increasing fruits and vegetables in our day-to-day. Add fruit to other foods. So instead of our waffles with butter and syrup, maybe we're adding some mashed up raspberries and some banana slices. Maybe we are making we're going to throw in some blueberries and maybe some raisins in there. Additionally, adding veggies to our dish as well. So if we have a tomato soup, maybe I have some spinach on hand that I can let wilt up and add that to my soup. It adds a little extra component. Barely noticed it in there, and I actually liked the additional texture that it gave to me. If I'm making a sandwich, maybe I'm adding a tomato slice with some lettuce, maybe a pickle on there, and maybe a red onion or something like that to kind of give my sandwich a little bit more than what it's just with cheese and meat. Add grated carrots and minced mushrooms to a pasta sauce. This is one I recently tried. I was a little apprehensive at first, thinking, okay, I'm adding mushrooms and carrots, but it gave it a great texture, and I really loved the flavor. A great way to add in, almost like sneakily add in some veggies to something that I already know I enjoy. Keep them in sight. So when I get home from the grocery store, try to wash it and put it on the counter if it's going to be like an apple, or maybe it's in the front of your fridge, because you're more likely to see it and choose that as an option. Make it quick. So have things on hand that are kind of nature shortcuts. Maybe you're grabbing a banana to take to work. Maybe you have bell peppers or little mini peppers that you're just going to put into a bag and take with you as a snack, or steam some vegetables. Get some frozen vegetables that you can steam. It took me about 3 minutes to make my vegetable side, and it's quick, so I'm doing it. And then cook vegetable forward meals. So try recipes that typically just have a lot of vegetables in them, like a stir fry, a vegetable stew, or maybe a curry. So we talked about foods that help us and ways to include them in our diet, but there are foods that increase our risk of heart disease as well. So limiting these foods can improve our heart health. First thing to look for would be added sugar. So getting 25% or more of our daily calories from added sugar doubles our risk of death from heart disease. So what we want to do is limit to 25 to 50 grams or less of added sugar per day. Added sugar, I like to give the example of, let's think apples, right? We're having an apple or having apple juice. Apple at its base contains sugar because it's sweet. It has that naturally occurring sugar that's found in fruit called fructose. So when I take a bite of my apple, I can taste that sweetness in my mouth, and it does have sugar in it. My apple juice, they've taken the sugar naturally occurring from the apple to the juice, but a lot of the times they'll add additional sugar in there. So maybe they'll add granulated sugar into my juice, and now that is added sugar that we're talking about. Things like that is where we're seeing that added sugar being added in. Of course, our candy, our cookies is all going to contain added sugar. Usually it's not naturally occurring in that case, and most of the sugar would be coming from added. The other thing we want to look out for is saturated fat. Not all fat is the same, and saturated fat can raise our LDL, or that bad cholesterol, while other fats are healthier for your heart. We talked about fats being those that are found in seafood, and the saturated fat is going to be also associated with animals, but hard at room temperature. So things like, let's say I have a big piece of ribeye, and we see that white, hard fat marbled throughout the piece of meat. That is going to be a source of saturated fat. Same thing with our butter. It's going to be hard at room temperature. That is also going to be a source of saturated fat. And I like to give the example of bacon. When we cook up bacon, maybe we ate the bacon and we're letting the fat kind of harden up in our pan. It becomes hard, and that's another prime example of our saturated fat. We can also find saturated fat in other products like our cheese, our milk, cream, things like that. And one plant-based source of saturated fat is actually going to be coconut oil. But I challenge you to think, when it's at room temperature or sitting on the grocery shelf, it is also going to be hard at room temperature. So saturated fat is one we want to limit to about 7 to 10% of our daily calories, or less than that. Last thing we want to limit is processed foods. So processed foods tend to be high in sodium, added sugar, and saturated fat. Aim to eat fewer processed foods and pay attention to the nutrition facts when you are making those choices. What about dietary cholesterol? I know there's a lot of questions about this, or at least the questions that I get in the store day after day. A lot of people, according to 2019 American Heart Association Advisory, studies have generally not supported an association between dietary cholesterol and cardiovascular risk. The current guidelines are keeping cholesterol consumption as low as possible without compromising the nutritional adequacy of the diet. Many foods that are high in dietary cholesterol are also high in saturated fats. So specifically meats, especially processed meats, butter, full fat dairy, or baked or fried goods. The question I usually get is, what about eggs? Eggs have cholesterol in them. Should I be eating them? Should I not be eating them? A lot of the times I recommend eggs. They tend to be low in that saturated fat, or that fat that's hard at room temperature. It's a lower source of saturated fat, even though it does have dietary cholesterol. I can feel good about recommending eggs to people because those studies really didn't support the association between eating the cholesterol from the egg and the cardiovascular risk. So if you have questions about that, continuing to eat eggs is okay and recommended. Tips for reducing our sodium in our day-to-day. You can always add your salt when cooking if you need to. For this reason, I also like to go further if I'm making a soup or a stew. Careful to look at the broth or the stock that I'm choosing to see if it's no salt added or low sodium, because almost always once I get to my recipe, they're having me add additional salt in, and I usually salt it to taste. So starting kind of from a lower sodium perspective can be helpful for limiting your sodium as you're cooking. Pay attention to nutrition facts labels. So choosing lower sodium processed foods, including our grains products. I was surprised when I started at this job and I started reviewing all the different categories for dietitian's choice, how much sodium was in bread or tortillas and things like that I didn't really think, or I wasn't expecting that. So that would be something to look for and make sure the choices that you're making, you're not adding a lot of salt where you didn't even look for it before. And then also take control of your intake of salt. Cook your own food and season it as you go. Try using herbs and spices to enhance the flavors. So maybe some fresh dill, some basil, rosemary, or thyme can be a great way to add flavors without adding the extra salt. Also using citrus. I think this is something that I tend to forget about, so I want to include a little slide about it here. Before or during cooking, you could add some lemon zest in, or after cooking, you could add lemon juice. When using zest, make sure you're adding it before or during the cooking, and when using juice, add it after the cooking to get the best flavor from those items you're adding the citrus into. In terms of reducing saturated fat in the diet, a couple things we can do. Choose leaner meats. So meat is the top source of saturated fat in the average US diet. Choose those less fatty cuts and skinless options when possible. So we talked about that big piece of meat, the ribeye with the fat marbled throughout. Choosing maybe like petite steak or something without as much fat marbled throughout the piece of meat would be a great option for a leaner cut of meat. And then also I like to point out poultry. We talked fish and all of its benefits, but poultry, it doesn't have that fat marbled throughout, and usually the fat is going to be right below the skin. So if you're choosing an option that the skin has already been removed, a lot of the time, most of that fat has been trimmed off as well. Again, limiting processed foods because those tend to be higher in saturated fats, and then try replacing to reduce. So try to replace saturated fats with healthier unsaturated fats. It can be easier than cutting things out. Vegetable-based oils instead of butter, or try swapping fish for meat a few times per week. Rather than just getting rid of it and feeling hungry all the time, try adding something in its place that could give you more benefits. Next, I wanted to look at that nutrition facts panel. It's something that's on every single piece of food that we eat, but a lot of the times we don't pay very close attention to it, or maybe we do, but we're not quite sure what I'm looking for. So here's my kind of quick rundown of it. First, look at the serving size. So for this specific item, the serving size is 2/3 of a cup. That's important for a couple of reasons, right? If it was ice cream and the serving size is 2/3 of a cup, but I ate a cup, now this nutrition information isn't accurate, right? It's going to be higher than what's actually on here. So knowing that the nutrition information is all based off of one serving size of this product. Second is calories. That's the second thing right near the top. Pay attention to the calories per serving and how many calories the whole package has. Again, the calories will increase if I'm eating a whole package versus just 2/3 of a cup. This is one piece of information that I think it's helpful for some who are maybe tracking calories, but a lot of the times I think it's hard to know if something's high calorie or low calorie. Specifically, it depends on what else you're eating in the day. This could be a low calorie, a low contributor of calories if you're eating a lot of other things to meet your needs during the day. Or it could be high if you've already ate a really large meal or 2 large meals and you're adding this in. So I think I like to look at calories with a grain of salt because it means something different for everybody, dependent on what else you ate in your day. The things we want to limit have the red arrows, those 3 things that we talked about: the saturated fat, the sodium, and the added sugar. And then the ones that you want to get enough of are going to be our dietary fiber. So this is listed under total carbohydrate, the protein, and then below that large black line is vitamin D, calcium, iron, and potassium. That's going to be where our vitamins and minerals are listed, and we generally want those to be higher to show it some more nutritious option, or contains those vitamins and minerals in the product that we're choosing. One thing I like to point out on here is that percent daily value. That percent on the sign, it gives us a good quick look or a quick judgment. I like to say if that percentage is higher than 20%, you can consider that product to be high in whatever that nutrient is. If it's 5% or lower, you would consider that item to be low. So for this specific product, there's grams of added sugar, or 20%. I would say that this product is high in added sugar. For the saturated fat, there's only 1 gram. So this product is low in saturated fat. Again, you can see how 2 things can be true. We want to limit both saturated fat and added sugar, and it's low in one, high in the other. So just kind of using that percent daily value quick check on products can help you maybe decide between 2 products. When I've done grocery store tours in the past, people have told me, it really helps when I'm comparing 2 different things with each other. That way I can tell, which might be the healthier option for me. So let's do a practice. We have 1 item on the left. Serving size is 1 cup, calories 100. Product 2, serving size is 1 cup, calories is 200. And there's the nutrition information listed below. So if anyone wants to type in the chat, which one do you think the healthier option is?
We're getting lots of ones.
Nice. Excellent. So these are 2 products that I took a peek at, both the same brand. One is the Greek Gods non-fat plain yogurt, and the other one is the Greek Gods honey yogurt. So we can see specifically when I'm looking at high versus low, we see the saturated fat in the honey yogurt is 25%, or it's high in saturated fat, where the non-fat plain yogurt is 0% or doesn't have any. The other thing I want to point out is the added sugar. So the added sugar on the honey yogurt, you can see that there's 15 grams added, or 30% of the daily value, again, going to be high in the added sugar, whereas the non-fat plain yogurt has 0 grams. Now comes the question of taste, right? Do I like non-fat plain yogurt? If you need a little something extra, I think this would be a great time to try the non-fat, but maybe you're adding your own honey or adding some berries to sweeten it, or some whole grain granola or something like that to sweeten it, so that you have the control of how much sugar is added to your item. Okay, I have one more to test this out on. The one on the left, number one, 13.4 grams, and calories is 150. Number two, the serving size is 113 grams and 250 calories. And which one do we think is the healthier option?
Again, it looks like we've got ones coming through the chat.
And you're right. In terms of heart health, the healthier choice is going to be the petite sirloin. And I included a picture up here. I know raw meat isn't the best thing to look at, but you can physically see the amount of fat difference between the two. So the petite sirloin, there's really not that much fat marbled throughout, maybe some, but the New York's cut, really you can see the fat on the top and marbled throughout. It's reflective of that saturated level. The one on the left, the petite sirloin, has 1.5 grams or 8% value. And the one on the right, that New York steak, has 7 grams of saturated fat or 35% of our daily value. Fiber and cholesterol. Getting back to kind of what we were talking about at the beginning. So soluble fiber or cholesterol, because it binds with cholesterol in your small intestine so that it can't be absorbed into your bloodstream. That soluble type of fiber can be found in oats, peas, beans, fruit. And the aim would be for at least 10 grams of soluble fiber per day. Another thing that can help reduce cholesterol is plant sterols and stanols. What they are is something that comes from plants that mimics cholesterol. So instead of binding cholesterol, your body will bind to the sterols, and your body will be able to let go of its own cholesterol because it's been blocked by that plant sterol. So these can be found in foods such as vegetable oil, nuts, grains, fruits, and vegetable. And the recommendation would be to aim for 2 to 3 grams of stanols and sterols per day. Tips to add fiber through your day would be add high fiber whole foods, beans and legumes. So those lentils, those fiber. Again, leaving on and choosing high fiber grains. So going back to that idea of grains and products that contain them. So rather than a regular pasta, maybe I'm looking for a whole wheat pasta, a whole wheat bread, or a whole wheat cereal. They could be a great. So put there. Let's look through eating. That's good for our heart. Some oatmeal, yogurt, walnuts, and banana. For lunch, I'm going to bring a grilled skinless chicken, avocado, bell peppers, spinach, and a whole tortilla or wrap, and then a peach. For snack, I'm going to have some carrots and hummus, unsalted mixed nuts, and fresh fruit. And for dinner, I'm choosing salmon with grilled asparagus, grilled pineapple, and cherry sauce to round it up. The last thing I wanted to touch on is another diet that has tons of benefits for heart health is the Mediterranean diet. It encourages all those things that we talked about, just kind of putting it together. It encourages things like fruits, vegetables, seafoods, nuts and seeds, whole grains, beans and legumes, lean poultry, and oils. This is where I'm going to leave you. I've got about 10 minutes left to answer any questions, but if you have any questions, this is a great email to go ahead and take down, dietitian@harmonsgrocery.com. Maybe you want more information, maybe you want to walk the aisles or sign up for a tour. You can definitely email us here and we can help you out. And then the American Heart Association, www.heart.org, is a great hub of different educational materials. But what I love to use it for is specifically the recipes. I like that we have this knowledge, this education, but for me, I need to know exactly how I can put it all together. So I love their lists of different recipes on there that can kind of get you started with a lot of these same concepts.
This has
and
been
then here's my information.
I've got some questions, if you're willing to take
Sure.
them. So it
I
looks
am.
like they're kind of peppered throughout. So let's go with the first one. I think it goes back to your conversation about vitamins and specifically magnesium. Is there a best type of magnesium to take in a supplement form if they feel like they're not being able to get that through their food?
So in terms of magnesium supplementation, I would always recommend getting it from your foods first. The reason being is a supplement will give you that magnesium, but also let's say I'm getting the magnesium from a handful of seeds or spinach. I'm also getting other vitamins and minerals as well as that fiber from those items. So I'd recommend that first. And then in terms of supplements, I always like to recommend that supplements are verified by some third party. So USP in terms of vitamins or NSF are two ones that will verify. In terms of supplement facts on vitamins and minerals, there isn't really a agency that regulates that mineral is what your package. So to recommend that there is some sort of third party that's verifying that yes, it does contain this amount of magnesium. So that's important to me. And then in terms of which type, there are many different salts. So you might see magnesium. I tend to see magnesium citrate is used a lot in terms of like a laxative effect. So having too much of that could maybe work too well or make you go to the bathroom a little bit. So I'd be careful with that one. But in terms of the other salts of magnesium, I don't know that I have a specific one in mind. But if you had further questions, just email me and we might be able to find something specific to you that could help you.
Perfect. Oh, go ahead, Catalina. It looks like you've got your hand raised. You can unmute yourself.
Sorry, I was just what was the magnesium that you should be careful with again? The one that might mess with your balance?
Yeah, citrate,
Citrate. Okay.
Citrate. And
Thank
sometimes it,
you.
it can be okay for people, especially if you're not having way too much of it. It could be fine, but that's just one that I caution people to be careful with.
Thank you.
We appreciate the caution piece of that. I don't think anybody wants that side effect. Okay, a couple of other questions that have come through the chat. You touched on this already when you talked about fresh, frozen, and canned, but specifically this is going towards fish. Does canned fish have high salt? Even if it's in water, like the processing, I'm sure probably includes the salt piece of it.
It can. And if we think of fish too, like usually a lot of the fish that we're eating is from salt water. So naturally, fish is going to have some sodium in it just at baseline. That would be, I guess, two-part answer to that. If you're shopping in our stores, we do look for salt in our dietitian's choice tagging program. So looking for that green tag would be a great way. If you're not shopping in one of our stores, flipping them over and comparing between, there are going to be that have less salt than others. Inherently, is a can going to have more than a fresh? Little to steer away from it or to avoid it. I would just compare the different options and choose the one that had lower amount of salt.
Beautifully said. We've got another question. I do feel like it's worth revisiting, even though you've already touched on it, is talking about the different types of fat, specifically when you were mentioning saturated and then the healthier alternative swaps. Somebody asked, what about olive oil and where does that land? I know you already mentioned, but I think it's worth
Yeah,
mentioning again.
of course. Yeah, so olive oil is going to be a mono unsaturated fat. So it is not going to be a saturated fat and is an option to be used. The one time that I caution using olive oil is any time that you're using like a really a lower smoke point. So something I would look for if you were doing like a rye or roasting at like 450 or something in your oven, I would tend to lean towards more of like a vegetable oil, just because it can handle that high heat cooking or it's, doesn't smoke up at that higher temperature. but I love olive oil. I think it's a great option, specifically for heart health.
Perfect. It just looks like we've got a comment. I didn't know that you did the free tours at Harmons, so people are really excited about that. They are fantastic. So we love that we're bringing awareness to that. And then it looks like, do you recommend tracking your food in a daily basis?
I think it depends per person and what your goals are. Do I think everyone needs to track their food on a daily basis? Not necessarily, no. A lot of the times, if people don't know how many calories they're eating or what they are eating, it's a good place to start. I think a lot of times people can get caught up in the numbers, and really it adds a lot more stress than it actually takes away from you. So if you are interested in getting a peek, I usually recommend people will just track maybe like 2 days, a weekday, and then a weekend day to kind of give yourself an idea. But I don't think daily is always helpful for everyone. And I think a lot of the times it can put up a barrier to eating healthy, or, being involved with making healthier choices. Feel like it is more of a chore than something that's just giving you some information. So if you're interested in it, usually I recommend like maybe a weekday and a weekend day to kind of look at what you're normally eating. Because I do think a lot of the times, at least for me, I get home from, I'm having a little bite of this and that, and I don't really realize what I'm eating until I'm really paying. So I don't think it needs to be done daily.
I love that you're mentioning just getting your baseline and then identifying what your goal is with the information that you'll be collecting. So that's wonderful. Last question, and then we'll wrap things up. This has been fantastic, and I think everyone could agree. We could probably listen to you teach and talk all day. So thank you so much for the information that you've been sharing. Last question is, are the cooking classes free?
Those are not free. The cost is going to vary per class, so it really depends. Usually they're around $60 to $80, I would say, but it really depends. So I teach one class which is like salmon and scallops, and that tends to be a little bit higher cost, whereas another one which is not as pricey on the proteins, those tend to be a little bit cheaper. But you can find that on our Harmons website. If you go on there and go into cooking classes, you can review, and it will have the price on there for checkout. So you can kind of review and see which one. The one I have coming up in February, I think it's next week. We might have a couple classes open. It's on the 11th. It's all about, I love your healthy guts. And so it's all about gut health and incorporating foods that are good for gut health. So yeah.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for coming out and talking with us today about heart health. I do love how you put it into perspective for us about making the educated decision and knowing what's out there and what's available to us, and then going from there, making that choice, also taking taste into consideration too, right? I loved when you talked about preparing foods, and if you're like, oh man, I don't necessarily like that, maybe it's time to revisit it and try a different seasoning or try a different way that you've cooked it before, and not completely just crossing it off or writing it off on our things that we're willing to eat and things that we're not willing to eat. So I do appreciate the fresh perspective that you've provided us with today. And there's lots of people commenting in the chat as well that they do really appreciate your classes and your education that you've provided. So thank you so much, Elizabeth. Elizabeth's contact information has been sitting on the screen. Please reach out if you do have any additional questions. The dietitian services with Harmons is phenomenal, as you've seen today. So thank you so much, Elizabeth, and thanks everyone for participating. Make sure to check off your participation on the Well Steps app to get your points for hanging out with us today. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thanks, Elizabeth. We'll chat soon.